She walked into the courtroom, head held high, her former husband sitting in a wheelchair, staring at her with eyes that carried more weight than words ever could. They weren't eyes of love, nor of pity, but of pure disbelief. Years ago, she had turned her back on him when life stripped away his health, his career, and his dignity. And yet, standing there in front of him now, she carried the one thing he never thought she would discover: a secret fortune worth $100 million, a fortune he had kept hidden in silence, even as she left him at his lowest point. What could drive a woman to abandon the man she once vowed to love through sickness and health? And what could drive a man to hide such unimaginable wealth in the shadows of his own suffering? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan was the kind of man who believed in quiet strength. Born into a working-class family in Ohio, he grew up watching his father labor long hours in a steel factory and his mother stitch clothes late into the night just to keep food on the table. From those days, Ethan carried with him a lesson: that dignity was not in how much you showed off, but in how much you endured without complaint. By the time he turned 30, Ethan had carved his own path. He was a self-made man, working endless hours in real estate, calculating risks no one else dared to take, and pouring every cent he earned back into building a foundation for the future. To the world, he appeared modest, almost ordinary. No flashy cars, no extravagant suits, just discipline, loyalty, and an unshakable work ethic that set him apart. Clara, on the other hand, had a different dream. She met Ethan during his climb, back when he was still trying to balance 2 jobs and build his first investment portfolio. At the beginning, she admired his determination, his ability to dream bigger than their circumstances. To her, he was a man who could promise security in a world where nothing was certain. But as the years passed, Clara's admiration slowly turned into expectation. She wanted more than quiet nights with Ethan buried in his work. She wanted recognition, the kind of life she saw on glossy magazine covers and in the lives of women who were celebrated for simply being married to successful men. She was supportive, yes, but her love came with conditions. Deep inside, she craved stability, luxury, and a life where she didn't have to look over her shoulder and wonder if she had settled for less. Their marriage began like most, full of sacrifice and whispered promises. Ethan would often come home late, his shirt drenched in sweat, his hands calloused from days spent visiting construction sites and endless meetings. Clara, at first, bore it with patience. She cooked for him, ironed his shirts, and reassured herself that their sacrifices would one day be worth it. And true to his word, Ethan delivered. Deals began to close, properties began to multiply, and the numbers in his accounts quietly grew. But here was the truth Ethan never spoke aloud. While the surface of their life looked modest, he had already built a fortune beyond what Clara could imagine. Only he didn't tell her. Every contract, every windfall, every unexpected profit, he funneled it quietly into hidden accounts. Why? That was the secret that lived in Ethan's heart, a secret that would one day tear their marriage apart. At first, Clara didn't notice. To her, Ethan's modesty looked like stability, his quiet habits like humility. But as the years went by, her patience began to wear thin. She started noticing the designer bags her friends carried, the sparkling rings they flaunted on social media, the vacations to places she had only dreamed of visiting. She compared her life to theirs, and suddenly Ethan's quiet loyalty didn't feel like enough. She began to question why her husband, who worked harder than anyone she knew, never seemed to provide the luxuries she craved. To Clara, it felt like she had sacrificed her youth, her energy, and her love for a life of waiting. And deep down, resentment began to take root. She wanted more attention, more recognition, more proof that she had chosen the right man. She wanted Ethan to show her, not just promise her, that all the years she invested were worth it. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind that blankets the city in mist and makes headlights blur into long streaks of white. Ethan had just wrapped up a site inspection for one of his development projects. He was exhausted, running on little sleep, and driving home through winding roads slick with water. In an instant, everything changed. A truck lost control on the opposite lane, skidding sideways, its horn blaring into the night. Ethan swerved, but it was too late. The impact was crushing, steel folding like paper, glass shattering into his skin. By the time the paramedics pulled him out, his body was broken. In the sterile light of the hospital, doctors delivered the verdict that would reshape his life forever. Ethan would never walk again. The man who had spent his entire life climbing, building, and moving forward was now confined to a chair, his independence stripped away overnight. The aftermath was brutal. Recovery was slow, the pain relentless, and the once strong, determined Ethan found himself at the mercy of others for the simplest tasks. His role as an executive, a man known for walking into boardrooms with quiet authority, was suddenly gone. The company that once valued his brilliance now quietly replaced him. His income, the stream that had carried their household, dried up almost overnight. Clara tried to be strong in the beginning. She sat by his side, whispered reassurances, and told him that they would face this together. For a moment, Ethan believed her. For a moment, he thought love might outlast the wreckage. But as weeks stretched into months, the cracks began to show. Hospital bills stacked on the counter, their savings drained faster than they could refill. The house, once filled with warmth, was now filled with tension, and Clara's gentle words soon turned into sharp sighs and unspoken resentments. Ethan noticed it in the little things, the way Clara no longer looked at him when he tried to speak, the way her hands lingered too long on the bills, as if silently blaming him for each unpaid debt. She began to retreat, emotionally at first, then physically. Friends invited her out, and she began to accept more often, leaving Ethan alone in the quiet house. She scrolled through social media endlessly, staring at women who flaunted their picture-perfect lives, while she felt stuck in one that was unraveling. To her, Ethan was no longer the man she married. He was a burden, a reminder of dreams that had slipped through her fingers, and though she tried to mask it with occasional kindness, her frustration seeped through. The lifestyle she once hoped for crumbled piece by piece, leaving only bitterness. What she didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that Ethan's fortune wasn't gone. It was hidden. Behind the silence, Ethan carried a secret bigger than either of them could bear. The accounts he had built over the years, the millions he had tucked away under layers of legal structures and offshore holdings, still remained untouched. To him, those funds were security, a safeguard against betrayal, a test of love that Clara never knew she was taking. As his body healed in fragments and his spirit battled despair, Ethan never mentioned the existence of that wealth. He watched her instead, studying her choices, her words, her patience, or lack thereof. Every moment became a revelation of who Clara truly was when stripped of comfort. The man she thought was broken was, in truth, still the same visionary, still the same provider, but with a secret power she had no idea existed, and it was only a matter of time before that secret would change everything. Clara's distance began like a shadow, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. She stopped lingering in their conversations, stopped asking how Ethan was feeling, and instead buried herself in excuses. Phone calls in the other room, sudden errands that kept her away for hours, nights spent scrolling through her phone until dawn, while Ethan lay awake, silently watching. Soon, the emotional absence turned into a physical one. She spent more time away from home than in it, and when she returned, the air was heavy with resentment. Ethan tried to reach her, tried to hold on to the love that once kept them together, but her eyes had already moved past him. What once was companionship now felt like two strangers living under the same roof. Slowly but surely, Clara was disappearing from his life, even though her body still stood in the same rooms he had built for them. The day Clara filed for divorce came without warning. There were no long conversations, no attempts at reconciliation, only cold documents placed on the table, her signature already etched across the lines. She cited "unbearable burden" as the reason, a phrase that stung more than the accident itself. To the world outside, Clara crafted her narrative carefully. She was the woman who had stood by her husband after tragedy, who had sacrificed her youth for a man now broken and dependent. She portrayed herself as a victim of circumstance, a woman who had no choice but to leave for her own sanity. Friends and family offered her sympathy, convinced that she had endured long enough. Ethan, however, knew the truth. He had felt her withdrawal, heard the sharpness in her tone, and seen the quiet calculation in her eyes. He knew this wasn't about survival, it was about desire for another life, one she had already chosen. Behind closed doors, Clara's truth was far different from the story she told others. She had already found comfort in another man, someone who could give her the attention, the luxury, and the recognition she craved. Ethan discovered it not through confrontation, but through silence, through the missing pieces of her time, the unfamiliar scent of cologne on her clothes, and the lingering smiles she carried back into their home after being out. To him, it was like watching his world collapse for the second time, only this time, not from steel and concrete, but from betrayal. Yet, in the face of heartbreak, Ethan chose a path few could understand. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He didn't reveal the one thing that could have turned the entire story in his favor. He let her go quietly, carrying his pain in silence, because he knew something she didn't. The fortune she assumed was gone was still his, hidden where no one could reach it. The divorce was finalized swiftly, leaving Ethan in the eyes of many as a man broken twice over, once by fate and again by love. Friends whispered about his downfall, neighbors pitied him. To the world, Ethan had lost everything: his health, his wife, his job, and his dignity. They shook their heads and wondered how a man so promising could fall so far. But what they didn't know was that Ethan's story was far from over. Beneath the silence, beneath the whispers of pity and loss, a truth lay untouched. Everyone thought Ethan had been stripped of all he once had. Everyone thought his life was a tragedy with no redemption. But that wasn't true. What no one saw, not even Clara, was the empire Ethan had quietly built in silence. While the world believed his accident had destroyed everything, the truth was far more astonishing. Over the years, Ethan had carefully funneled his earnings into a network of hidden accounts, trusts, and offshore holdings. His modest home and frugal lifestyle had been a shield, a way to keep curious eyes from noticing the fortune he was amassing. Beneath the surface of his quiet demeanor lay a financial kingdom worth more than $100 million. Properties spread across states, investments in thriving companies, and accounts that quietly grew in value, all kept hidden under layers of privacy. To the world, Ethan was a broken man, clinging to survival. In reality, he was wealthier than most could ever dream, guarding a secret that would one day rewrite the story of his life. But why would a man like Ethan hide such wealth? The answer was rooted in his own understanding of people. Ethan had watched the world long enough to know that money changes everything. He distrusted the way it altered relationships, the way it drew opportunists into the lives of those who had it. He had seen colleagues destroyed not by failure, but by false friends and manipulative partners who saw them only as a means to an end. For Ethan, secrecy was protection, not only from strangers, but even from those closest to him. He believed that true loyalty, true love, could only be measured when wealth was absent. And so he lived simply, spoke little of his successes, and carried his secret fortune like a man carrying a locked box, unwilling to hand over the key to anyone, even the woman he once vowed to spend his life with. When Clara walked away, she believed she was leaving a man who had nothing left to give. In court, she fought for what she could, demanding alimony, pressing for her share of the life she claimed to have built with him. But Ethan, calm and deliberate, gave her only what the law required. He let her leave with scraps, never revealing the treasure chest she had so easily abandoned. To Clara, She had escaped the prison of poverty and burden. To Ethan, he had been freed from a love that proved conditional, a bond that collapsed the moment wealth disappeared from sight. She left with her head held high, believing she had won. But in truth, she had walked away from a hidden world worth over $100 million, a world that she would one day regret turning her back on, because fate wasn't done with them yet. Years later, their paths would collide again. The years that followed were unkind to Clara. At first, she basked in the thrill of her new life, parading around with her new partner as if she had traded up from sorrow to stability. There were trips, expensive dinners, and the luxury she had once envied in others. But her joy was short-lived. Her partner, who had promised her everything, slowly revealed himself as reckless with money and careless with loyalty. Investments failed, debts mounted, and soon Clara found herself living a life eerily similar to the one she had abandoned. Only this time, there was no Ethan working quietly in the background to carry the weight. When betrayal came again, her partner leaving her for someone younger and wealthier, it shattered what little security she thought she had left. The woman who once walked out on her husband's pain was now left to confront her own, with no safety net beneath her. Meanwhile, Ethan's story took a different path. Though his body never fully healed, his spirit refused to remain broken. Through grueling therapy sessions, he regained strength where he could, not just in muscle, but in mind and in will. Surrounded by loyal friends and trusted allies, Ethan rebuilt his life from the ashes of loss. He returned to the world of business, not with the arrogance of someone flaunting wealth, but with the wisdom of a man who knew what truly mattered. Strategic investments flourished, new partnerships were forged, and his influence grew quietly, just as it always had. Despite the wheelchair, despite the whispers of pity, Ethan's name became one spoken with respect in circles that Clara could no longer enter. His confidence returned, not in the form of vanity, but in a quiet dignity that made those around him proud to stand by his side. Ethan was no longer a victim. He was stronger than ever. Clara began to hear whispers. At first she dismissed them as idle gossip, nothing more than stories invented to fill silence. But as the rumors grew louder, the truth became harder to ignore. People spoke of Ethan as if he were a man reborn, a man who, despite his disability, had rebuilt his empire from nothing. Some even whispered that he was wealthy beyond imagination, that his accident had not destroyed him, but had instead awakened a sharper, more resilient force. Clara's curiosity soon turned to desperation. How could it be? How could the man she had left broken and penniless now stand at the center of success? Regret gnawed at her, regret mixed with envy, and so she began to plot. With careful calculation, she wondered how she might re-enter his life, how she might weave herself back into the story she thought she had ended. But what she didn't realize was that Ethan had been waiting for this moment. Clara returned to Ethan's life like a ghost from the past, cloaked in softness that felt rehearsed. She spoke of regret, of sleepless nights haunted by choices she now called mistakes. Her words dripped with sorrow, her voice trembling as she told him she had never stopped loving him, that she had been young, foolish, and blinded by fear. She placed her hand gently on his, as if touch could erase years of abandonment. To the outside observer, she seemed like a woman desperate to mend what had been broken. But Ethan, seasoned by betrayal, sat quietly, his expression steady. He listened with patience, his eyes calm, his heart fortified. He knew the difference between sincerity and performance, and Clara's return carried the unmistakable weight of both desperation and calculation. Still, he let her speak, watching as she spun her narrative with the same conviction she had once used to justify leaving him behind. For days, Clara pressed her act with persistence. She cooked for him, wheeled him out into the sun, and reminisced about their younger days, as if memories could disguise motives. She cried openly in front of him, begging for forgiveness, her words slipping between apologies and promises of renewed devotion. Ethan, however, never revealed the storm beneath his calm exterior. He didn't question her intentions, nor did he push her away. Instead, he watched, studied, and allowed her to believe she was making progress. In her mind, she was winning him back. In his, he was simply allowing her rope enough to tie her own fate. Each night, as Clara whispered hopeful words about second chances, Ethan remained stoic, his silence carrying more weight than any reply could. Because deep within him, he knew what Clara did not. The truth was no longer his burden alone. Sooner or later, the world would discover it. And then, the moment of reckoning drew closer. For as much as Clara believed she was weaving herself back into Ethan's heart, forces beyond her control were aligning. Whispers were spreading faster, rumors growing bolder, and questions about Ethan's quiet resilience demanded answers. Clara had left a man she believed was broken and penniless, only to return to someone cloaked in mystery and strength. She thought her performance was convincing him to forget, to forgive, to fold. But what she didn't understand was that Ethan held something far more powerful than forgiveness: truth. And when the truth came out, when the world discovered the fortune she had walked away from, Clara's life would never be the same. The truth came crashing into the open, not through Ethan's words, but through circumstance. A court case involving a contested inheritance forced Ethan's financial records into public light. Overnight, the man everyone pitied was thrust onto the front pages of newspapers and the feeds of every media outlet. Ethan, the broken husband, the man in the wheelchair, the one left behind, was revealed to be worth more than $100 million. The news spread like wildfire, shocking neighbors, friends, and business associates who had believed him ruined. And then, it reached Clara. She read the headlines with trembling hands, the color draining from her face. The man she had abandoned, the man she claimed was a burden, had been holding a fortune all along. The realization cut deeper than any wound. She hadn't just left her husband. She had walked away from a legacy, from a life she never truly understood. Clara's world shattered in silence. She remembered the nights she mocked his frugality, the moments she resented his modesty, and the day she filed those divorce papers thinking she had freed herself from poverty. Now, with the world watching, she was left with the undeniable truth. Ethan had been the provider she always wanted, but in ways she never had the patience to see. Desperate, she reached out, this time not with feigned affection but with raw pleading. She begged for forgiveness, begged for another chance, begged to stand beside him now that the world knew who he really was. But Ethan, steady and unflinching, denied her. His voice carried no anger, only resolve. He reminded her of the vows she had broken when life tested them. He reminded her that love built on conditions was never love at all. And for the first time, Clara realized that there was no door left open for her return. Instead of clinging to bitterness or vengeance, Ethan chose a different path. With the eyes of the world on him, he directed portions of his wealth toward causes Clara once scoffed at. He funded programs for struggling families, supported hospitals for accident victims, and gave scholarships to young people who, like him, had once been told they wouldn't amount to much. Where Clara had sought luxury, Ethan sought meaning. Where she had abandoned, he chose to uplift. And the contrast between them grew sharper than ever. Clara was left staring at the man she had underestimated, her heart consumed by regret, while Ethan gained something far greater than wealth or revenge. Clara was left with nothing but regret, while Ethan gained something far greater. In the end, Ethan's greatest victory was not the fortune he revealed to the world, nor the shock that silenced those who once pitied him. His triumph was in the quiet dignity with which he carried his pain, rebuilt his spirit, and chose carefully who was worthy of standing by his side. Money had always been a tool, never his identity. What defined him was his resilience, the unshakable strength to rise after life had broken his body, to rebuild after betrayal had shattered his heart, and to live with the kind of dignity no wealth could ever buy. Clara lost everything because she could not see that. Ethan, however, gained something she never truly valued: peace, respect, and a life surrounded by people who stood by him not for his wealth, but for who he was. Sometimes the richest treasure isn't the fortune we hide, but the people who choose to stay when everything else is gone. Ethan's story is not just about wealth or betrayal. It's about the choices we make when life tests us and the consequences that follow when love is conditional. So I ask you, what would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have stayed through the storm, or would you have walked away? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched you, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more gripping stories every week.